So let us now think, when we are a preaching movement, Bhaktivedanta Mana, ISKCON is a preaching movement, Bhaktivedanta Mana is a preaching movement, Pandava Sen is definitely a heavyweight preaching movement. And when we're preaching, often we have to focus on a lot of practical dimensions of preaching. What is the practical dimension of preaching and sharing Krishna consciousness? We have to be relevant. We have to address people's needs, interests, concerns. We have to speak to them in a language that they can understand. Very, very important. We have to be understandable. If you want to take someone somewhere, first you have to meet them where they are. So yes, we must be understandable. We must be able to communicate Krishna consciousness in a way that people can digest it. We have to be dynamic. We have to move with the times. We have to utilize the technologies available, understand the trends that are going on and tap into them. We have to be organized. Prabhupada said, yes, organization and intelligence. This is how the movement will go on. So there is a whole practical dimension to sharing Krishna consciousness. But now I'm kind of going to get into the crux of what I want to share with you. There is also an internal dimension to Krishna consciousness that we have to deeply consider. There is an internal dimension to preaching which makes it actually work, which makes it actually powerful, which makes it actually go into a deeper place within people's hearts. First thing is integrity. The integrity of the preacher. How much they're actually in line with what they're saying. We often hear that there's the book Bhagavat and then there's the person Bhagavat. And the person Bhagavat is the one who in their conduct, in their mind, words and activities encapsulates the teaching of the Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada, I mean, imagine someone who was followed everywhere, who was videoed, whose classes were recorded, whose room conversations were recorded, who was practically followed by people from morning to evening, day after day after day, but who was never found to be duplicitous, hypocritical, who was never found to be superficial, who was never found to be pretentious in any way. How much integrity Srila Prabhupada had. One person, he said, I looked at Srila Prabhupada and what convinced me that this is a saintly person is that I observed him day in, day out, and I practically saw that he was never trying to impress anyone. I thought that was a profound realization. He said he was never trying to impress anyone. And that convinced me this is a saintly person. Because only a saintly person can conduct their life in such integrity that they don't have any of that superficiality. The internal dimension of preaching is to preach with realization. Mukunda Maharaj met Prabhupada for the first time. It's a fascinating account. He talks about how he went into the Bowery and walked up the stairs and how he saw Prabhupada for the first time, the whole scene, how he sat down and heard from Srila Prabhupada. And he said, practically, I heard Srila Prabhupada, practically, I couldn't understand what he was saying. But when I heard the vibration coming from his mouth, I couldn't understand what he was saying fully. I couldn't grasp it. But I sensed that here was someone who had something very important to tell the world, because when he spoke with such urgency. In other words, when we communicate with others, we're not just communicating words, but we're communicating our conviction. And Srila Prabhupada, because he had so much realization, when he spoke, he could speak the same things that we may try to repeat, but when Srila Prabhupada spoke, it was power-packed, because it was power-packed with a heavyweight realization behind it. How much realization do we have of what we're speaking about? When we speak with realization, it has more impact. Empowerment. The internal dimension of preaching is to understand Krishna Shakti Vinana He Parapravartan, that without Krishna's empowerment, there is no possibility to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. I mean, Sutapa was 69. Sorry, not 60. When did he go right? Right, he was 63. 63. Prabhupada went to Radha Damodar in 1959. He knew that he wanted to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. He was already 63 years old. I mean, time was running out. Yet Prabhupada still felt it was absolutely necessary to go to Radha Damodar and stay there for 6 years at the age of 63, when his time is already running out. But he said, no, I've got to take this time. I've got to pray at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Raghunath and get their mercy before anyone can spread the Krishna consciousness movement. And there, Prabhupada stayed in Radha Damodar, praying, meditating, serving, beseeching the Goswamis for their mercy to do his mission. Because he realized Krishna Shakti Vinana He Tadaprabha, without the mercy, without the empowerment, it's not possible. And compassion. That is another huge internal dimension of preaching, that how much do we actually have the compassion? Sometimes we're exposed for our lack of compassion. I remember once I was in Kettering, I was distributing books all day. We were flying out so many books. In the middle of the day, I met a Christian lady, and she wanted to convince me that she was actually very impressed at what I was doing. But naturally, she wanted me to be a Christian monk. So we had some conversation, and then she left. And I carried on distributing books. And then she came back half an hour later, but she didn't come back to me. She sat on a bench close by to where I was distributing books. So I could see she was there and she was watching me, but she didn't come and speak to me. I carried on distributing books probably for another 3 or 4 hours. And she was sitting right there for all of that time. I finished distributing books. The books had finished by Krishna's grace. And she came up to me. And with tears in her eyes, she went into her bag and she pulled out a Bible, a deluxe Bible, an expensive Bible that she had just bought from Waterstones. And she looked at me and she said, I've been watching you all day. You're amazing. Your sacrifice is so great. I can see you have all the spiritual qualities. Now, please just consider reading this book. It will really help you. So I was like, you've been sitting there for 4 hours. Why didn't you just tell me 4 hours ago? She said, no, I didn't want to disturb you. I didn't want to disturb you. I don't want to cause a disturbance. Now you're finished. I'm just coming up. I waited this long because I wanted to give this to you. And at that moment, I just felt so exposed. Because there I was standing in the street all of those hours in that day, flying out so many books. But practically, I thought to myself, I didn't give out one book with the compassion, with the concern, with the care, with the genuine love that she has just handed me this book. And as we were going home, we remembered the quote, you can love to preach, but do you love the people you're preaching to? Prabhupada had that love. He had so much compassion. Therefore, when he communicated, it hit a higher spot in people's, or a deeper spot in people's consciousness. So now what I want to say basically is that obviously both of these dimensions are incredibly important in sharing Krishna consciousness. But what can sometimes happen is that we veer towards dealing with these things and we can neglect the internal. Why may that happen? Because you see, things on this side are tangible. Things on this side are somewhat intangible. And sometimes, therefore, it's more difficult to focus on them, focus on the internal dimension. Things on this side are appreciated. People will see it. People will applaud you for it. People will commend you for it. But things on this side are things in the invisible world that no one sees. And generally, the parts of our life that no one sees are the parts of our life that we generally don't put much energy into, because we're very concerned about the things that people are seeing. This is very much dealing with things outside of us, whereas this is dealing with things inside of us. We're much more comfortable dealing with the outside world than trying to re-engineer our own inside world. Our chronic tendency is to think the solution is always external, and therefore it's easier to change. Tolstoy once said, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. So it's easier to change the outside than the inside. Here, you generally get an immediate sense of result or an immediate kind of feedback. Internal things sometimes take a longer duration to see anything, to experience anything, to actually tangibly kind of understand the effects of it. And therefore, generally, because our tendency is always towards chaos, the immediate, therefore we tend towards the practical rather than the internal. And to some extent, the practical is known to us, but the internal is unknown to us. And therefore, it's easier to deal with those things that you know about. We know about how to organize, so let's organize better. We know about what kind of language to use to teach people, so let's change that. But do we know about what it means to re-engineer the heart? That we don't know about. Do we know about what it means to overcome envy and how to go about doing that? That we don't know. So it's much more difficult to deal with the unknown. And so I think for these reasons, sometimes this aspect of life and investing in this aspect can become neglected. Yet if we fail to do this, if we fail to develop the internal dimension of internal dimension of Krishna consciousness, then the practical may well be there. We may well experience many results from that, but the full impact won't occur unless there is simultaneously an internal transformation as well.